She thought I was just another guest at my own party. I watched her from across the lawn, my daughter, Caroline, 42 years old now, moving between the white-clothed tables with a tray balanced on one hand, refilling champagne glasses, nodding politely at strangers, wearing a black uniform I had never seen before. The kind of uniform a catering staff wears. The kind of uniform you wear when someone else is paying you to be invisible. The estate sprawled behind her 12 acres of rolling Kentucky bluegrass. The stone manor house I had spent 11 years building from a crumbling 1890s farmhouse. The stables my late wife Margaret had loved more than any room inside. 74,000 square feet of property that I had turned from nothing into something worth $8 million, at minimum. And my daughter was carrying a tray across it like she worked there. Because apparently she did. She didn't look up when I walked through the iron gate. A man in his mid-60s, a little thinner than I used to be, wearing clothes that hadn't been pressed in days. I suppose I didn't look like anyone worth noticing. The guests milling around the garden were dressed in linen and silk, laughing too loudly, holding their glasses with both hands the way people do when they want to seem like they've always had money. I recognized the party. A summer gathering. My brother had always thrown one every July. I just hadn't expected him to throw it here. I stood at the edge of the garden for a long moment and watched my daughter refill a stranger's champagne glass on the porch of my house. And I made myself breathe slowly, the way my doctor in Lexington had told me to when things felt too large to hold. Then I walked across the grass toward her. She turned just before I reached her, balancing the tray with both hands, and gave me the automatic smile of someone well-trained in hospitality. Her eyes moved over my face with polite efficiency, the way you look at someone when you are trying to figure out which table they belong to. She didn't know me. For just a moment, one terrible, quiet moment, the whole world went still. Then she said, "Sir, are you a guest this evening? I can help you find your name on the list." And I realized, looking at the careful professional distance in my daughter's eyes, that I had a great deal of work to do before this night was finished. My name is Arthur Caldwell. I am 67 years old. For 5 of those years, 5 years, 4 months, and 11 days, to be exact, the world believed I was dead. I want to be clear about what happened, because it matters that you understand it correctly. I did not disappear voluntarily. I did not abandon my family or walk away from my responsibilities. I was a man driving home on a Tuesday night in November, on a road I had driven 4,000 times, when a truck ran a red light at 60 miles an hour and hit the driver's side of my car at the intersection of Route 60 and Millfield Road, just outside of Harrodsburg. I know this because my surgeon told me 9 weeks later, when I regained enough consciousness to understand words again. What I do not know, what I spent 5 years not knowing, is what happened to my life in the time between that intersection and the moment I woke up. I had built Caldwell Farm over the course of my adult life. I want you to understand what that means, because people throw the word built around loosely. I mean that I was 26 years old when I bought the original 60 acres of land with money I had saved working 14-hour days on a commercial construction crew. I mean that I poured the foundation of the main house with my own hands. I mean that I was the one who planted the first walnut trees along the eastern fence line, who ran the electrical wire through the north barn, who rebuilt the stone wall along the creek bed after the flood of 1998 took half of it downstream. Margaret and I raised Caroline there. We buried our dog there. We watched the sun come up over those fields for 31 years together, until the morning Margaret didn't wake up, and then I watched it alone for 4 more. The accident happened 8 months after Margaret died. My brother Raymond was the one who came to the hospital. He was the one who sat in the waiting room while surgeons worked on my brain. He was the one who, when doctors said the outcome was uncertain, when they used words like persistent vegetative state and no guarantee of meaningful recovery, he was the one who handled the paperwork. Raymond was my only living family. He was also, as it turned out, the only person with both the access and the patience to do what he did next. I found out most of it later, in pieces, through documents that took me months to gather. But here is what he did. He waited 14 months. He waited until the doctors at the long-term care facility in Frankfurt had become accustomed to my condition, until the nurses knew his face, until the staff thought of him as a devoted brother fulfilling a difficult duty. And then he filed for guardianship. With guardianship established, He had legal authority to act on my behalf. The farm transferred to his name 18 months after the accident. The filing listed the transaction as a management arrangement to protect the asset while I remained incapacitated. Caroline was 27 at the time and had been living in Nashville, building a career as a landscape architect. She had visited me twice in those early months. She had called the facility regularly, but she was not named in any of the guardianship documents. Raymond handled all communication with the care facility. He was the one who answered the phone when the staff called. And at some point I still do not know exactly when Raymond told my daughter that I had died. He told her there had been a complication, a secondary stroke. He handled the arrangements, he said. He had taken care of everything the way he always did. There was no funeral. He told her I had specified cremation, no service, which was, in fact, what my will had indicated. There was no body to see. There was no grave to visit. There was only Raymond, reliable and sorrowful, managing the details of his brother's death the way he had managed everything else. Caroline came home, and Raymond, who now legally owned Caldwell Farm, offered his grieving niece a place to stay while she got back on her feet. That was 5 years ago. I woke up fully, meaningfully, with my name and my memories and my ability to speak and walk 17 months ago. Not all at once. The mind doesn't return the way it left. It comes back the way a tide comes in, slow and uneven, with long stretches where nothing moves, and then sudden rushes of clarity. But by the 14th month after I first opened my eyes and recognized a nurse's face, I could read, I could write, I could hold a conversation for an hour without losing the thread. The facility in Frankfurt Shady Ridge Care Center had a social worker named Denna Marsh. She was a thin woman in her 50s, who wore the same 4 cardigans in rotation and kept a picture of her grandchildren on her desk. She was the one who first said to me, clearly and without softening it, "Mr. Caldwell, we have not been able to reach your designated next of kin. Your brother has not returned calls in over a year. And your daughter, we have a number on file, but it appears to be disconnected." I lay in that bed and listened to her say this, and felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with illness. "What about the farm?" I said. Denna looked at her file. She looked at it for a long time. "The address we have on file for you," she said carefully, "appears to be associated with a different name in the county property records. I am a man who built things with his hands. I am not, by nature, a patient man, but I had learned patience in that bed, learned it the way you learn to walk again after you've forgotten how, one slow step at a time, humiliating and necessary. So I did not raise my voice. I did not panic. I looked at Denna Marsh and I said, "I need to make some phone calls. Can you help me do that?" She could. She did. The first call I made was to an attorney in Lexington named Paul Whitfield, who had handled my estate planning 15 years earlier, and who, unlike many people I might have called, had absolutely no connection to Raymond. It took 3 attempts through the facility's phone system before I reached someone in his office who understood what I was saying. When Paul called me back the next morning, there was a long silence after I finished speaking. "Arthur," he said, "I need you to say that again." I said it again. All of it. There was another silence. Are you medically documented as competent?" he said. Not unkindly, practically. "Get me tested," I said. "Whatever you need. I'll do it today." He got me tested. I passed every evaluation they put in front of me, and Paul Whitfield, who had known me for 15 years and recognized every answer I gave and every detail I provided, began pulling documents. What he found took 6 weeks to fully understand. Raymond had been living at Caldwell Farm for 4.5 years. He had converted the East Wing into a rental property and was collecting income on it. He had sold 17 acres of the north pasture to a developer for a subdivision project. He had taken out a home equity line of credit against the property, $140,000, most of which appeared to have been spent on renovations to the main house. He had thrown 3 parties there a year. He had joined the local country club on the strength of the address. And my daughter, my Caroline, had been living in the farmhouse the entire time, listed in Raymond's personal records, which we eventually obtained through discovery, not as family, as household staff. She cooked, she cleaned, she managed the grounds, she organized the parties, she was paid in room and board. She thought her father was dead, She had nowhere else to go, no money she hadn't spent grieving and relocating back from Nashville. And Raymond had taken her in and given her the only home she'd ever known and made her a servant in it. I sat with that knowledge for 3 days before I could think clearly about it. Then I told Paul, "Let's be very careful about how we do this. The legal process took 11 months. I will not walk you through every motion and counter motion, every deposition and continuance, because that is not really what this story is about. What I will tell you is that the core of the case was straightforward. I was alive. I had never legally consented to the transfer of the farm. The guardianship had been obtained through material misrepresentations to the court. Raymond had characterized my prognosis as far more terminal than the medical record supported, and he had failed to disclose that a second physician had disagreed with that assessment. The home equity line of credit had been taken out by a guardian on behalf of a ward who had never been adjudicated incompetent and was, in fact, still alive and mentally capable. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, elder financial exploitation, which is, in Kentucky, a felony. But before any of that became public, before Raymond had any idea that the brother he had filed paperwork on was awake and talking to a lawyer, I needed to see my daughter. I needed to see her, and I needed to understand what she knew. Because the thing I hadn't let myself think about clearly, the thing that sat at the edge of every conversation with Paul, every review of every document, was the question of whether Caroline had known I was alive, whether she had been a part of it. Paul told me I was being irrational. He said the evidence strongly suggested she had been deceived just as completely as everyone else. He said her treatment as unpaid household labor was not consistent with a co-conspirator who had received any benefit. I knew he was right, but I needed to see her face. Raymond threw his summer party on the third Saturday in July. I knew this because he had been doing it for 20 years. Because Margaret and I had attended 6 of them in a different location before the accident, and because Paul's investigator had confirmed the date. I also knew that Caroline managed the catering arrangements, coordinated the staff, and was present and working for the full duration of the event. I drove to Harrodsburg on a Friday afternoon. I checked into a motel on the edge of town, not under my own name, at Paul's insistence, though the legality of my presence on my own property was, by this point, fully established in a sealed court filing. I ate a sandwich from a gas station and sat on the edge of the motel bed and looked at a photograph on my phone that Paul's investigator had taken of my daughter 3 weeks earlier, going about her day. She looked older. Of course she did. She had been 27 when the accident happened, and she was 32 now. But it wasn't just years. There was something careful about the way she held herself, something watchful that hadn't been there before. Margaret used to say Caroline walked through a room like she owned it. In the photograph, she walked through a room like she was trying not to take up too much space. I turned the phone over and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The next afternoon, I drove through the gate of Caldwell Farm for the first time in 5 years and 4 months. The walnut trees along the east fence were taller. The stone wall along the creek had been repaired not the way I would have done it, but adequately. The garden where Margaret had grown her tomatoes had been converted into a decorative flower bed that looked expensive and impersonal. Raymond had painted the main house white. It had been natural wood when I left it. The white looked fine, I supposed. It just didn't look like mine. There were 40 or 50 guests on the back lawn, men and women in their 40s and 50s, the kind of people who had done well enough to be comfortable and wanted everyone to know it. A string quartet was playing in the shade of the oak tree I had planted from a seedling in 1994. The tables had white linens. Someone had ordered flowers from a real florist. And then I saw her, moving through the guests with a tray, and for a moment I could not make myself take another step. She wore a black uniform. Her hair was pulled back. She was smiling the professional smile that I had never seen on her face before. The one that doesn't reach the eyes, the one you develop when you are required to be pleasant to people who don't notice you. She looked competent and efficient and entirely, heartbreakingly invisible. I crossed the lawn toward her. She turned before I reached her, the way you do when you sense someone approaching, and she looked at my face with polite professional attention, and she actually said, "Can I help you find your seat, sir? Do you have your name on the guest list?" And I said, "Caroline." Just her name, nothing else. She looked at me. Something shifted in her face, a small, involuntary thing. The kind of thing you can't decide to do. Her eyes moved over my features with sudden, focused attention, no longer the practiced scan of a hospitality worker, but something else entirely, something private and searching and almost frightened. The tray dipped slightly in her hand. She caught it. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. Have we met?" "Look at me," I said. She looked at me. I watched her do it, watched her really look, the way she hadn't let herself do it first. Watched the recognition move through her face like light through water, slow and then all at once. She said my name. Not sir. Not can I help you. She said, "Dad?" And the tray went down on the nearest table, and her hands came up to cover her mouth, and I crossed the remaining distance between us in 4 steps and caught her before her legs decided to stop working. We stood in the middle of Raymond's garden party for a long time. People looked. I didn't care, and neither did she. I held my daughter in my arms, this woman who had been a little girl running across these same fields, who had learned to ride in these stables, who had read on the porch of this house for 30 years, and I felt her shaking against my shoulder, and I said, quietly, so only she could hear, "I'm here. I'm real. I need you to listen to me. Can you do that?" She pulled back far enough to look at my face again, the way you do when you can't trust what you're seeing. Her eyes were wet. "They told me you died," she said. "I know. Raymond said there was a secondary—" "I know what Raymond said." She searched my face. "How long have you been?" "A while," I said. "I'll explain everything. But right now I need you to keep working. I need you to finish this party. I need Raymond to have no idea that I was here. Can you do that for me?" She stared at me. "You want me to— Dad, I don't understand what's happening." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. But I need one more day. Just one more day, and then I promise you it's over. Can you trust me?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up the tray. "I'll be done by 9, she said. I left the farm before Raymond came outside. I sat in the motel parking lot and called Paul and told him it was time. The next morning, Paul filed the motions that had been sitting in draft form for 11 months. The Kentucky State Police Financial Crimes Division, which had been briefed 3 weeks earlier and had been waiting on our coordination, executed a search warrant at Caldwell Farm at 9:15 in the morning. The county sheriff's department accompanied them. Raymond was eating breakfast when they arrived. Paul told me this later, that he was sitting at the kitchen table in the house I had built, eating eggs, and that he went very pale when the officers knocked and did not recover his color for the rest of the morning. He was arrested on 4 counts: fraud upon the court in the guardianship proceeding, financial exploitation of an adult, theft by deception, unauthorized practice as a fiduciary. His attorney, who arrived within the hour, began making calls immediately, but the documentation Paul had assembled over 11 months was substantial, and the calls did not accomplish much. I was not there for the arrest. I was sitting in a diner in Harrodsburg with my daughter, drinking coffee I didn't really want. Watching her read through a summary document, Paul had prepared a timeline of everything that had happened, with the key documents attached. She read it slowly. She turned the pages carefully. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finished, she set it down on the table and looked out the window at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan. A dog was asleep in a patch of sun near the entrance. Ordinary morning. The kind you don't notice until you've lost the ability to have them. 5 years, she said. Yes. I thought you were gone, she said it quietly, without dramatics. Just a statement of what 5 years had felt like. I thought I grieved you, Dad. I had a ceremony. Just me and a few people. In the backyard. I said things. I thought you were gone. I know, I said. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. She shook her head. You didn't do this. No. But you still lost 5 years. That's real, regardless of who caused it. She picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking. He made me work there, she said. He told me it was temporary, just until I got on my feet. But every time I talked about leaving, looking for work, getting an apartment, there was a reason it wasn't the right time. The party coming up. The East Wing tenants needing something. I kept thinking I was being ungrateful. That he was being generous, giving me a place to stay, and I was being difficult. I looked at my daughter. This careful, watchful version of her, with the professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. You weren't being difficult, I said. I know that now. You were being managed. She was quiet for a moment. I kept the house beautiful, she said, and there was something proud and sad in it at the same time. I kept it exactly the way Mom would have wanted it. I told myself that was why I stayed, that I was taking care of it for, I didn't know what for. But I kept thinking about how much work you'd put into it, and I couldn't stand the idea of it being let go. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. You took good care of it, I said. I saw it when I came through the gate, the creek wall, the stables, the garden. He changed the paint, she said. I noticed. I hated the white. So did I. She laughed short, a little wet around the edges, but real. The first real laugh I'd heard from her in 5 years. The legal proceedings moved faster than Paul had predicted. Raymond's attorney attempted several arguments that were disposed of efficiently, that the guardianship had been obtained in good faith, that the property transfer had been a legitimate protective measure, that his client had not known I would recover. The medical record was the problem for him. The second physician's assessment, the one Raymond had never disclosed, was in writing and dated. It clearly indicated a non-negligible probability of meaningful recovery. Raymond had seen it. His signature was on the receipt of the document. He knew. He had known there was a chance I would wake up, and he had transferred the farm anyway. He had taken the equity line anyway. He had sold the north pasture anyway, and he had told my daughter that I was dead. The civil recovery was straightforward. The farm title was voided and restored. The equity line was his personal liability. The proceeds from the north pasture sale became the subject of a separate civil suit that I will spare you the details of, except to say that it resolved in my favor. Raymond's attorney negotiated a plea on the criminal charges, 2 felony counts, reduced through cooperation, resulting in 18 months of incarceration and 5 years of supervised release. His attorney called it a good outcome for his client. Paul called me from the courthouse parking lot to tell me. I was at the farm, standing on the back porch, looking at the garden. Caroline was inside making coffee. It's done, Paul said. Yes, I said. How do you feel? I thought about that for a moment. The string quartet had played under that oak tree 2 days ago. The white linens had been on those tables. 40 people had stood on this lawn eating food my daughter had prepared, and none of them had known whose house they were in. I feel like I'd like to repaint the house, I said. Paul laughed. That's probably a healthy response. Caroline came out with 2 mugs and handed me one and stood beside me looking at the back lawn. The summer light was long and gold the way Kentucky light gets in July, coming in low across the fields, catching the walnut trees along the fence line. What are you thinking about? She said. Your mother's tomatoes, I said. I'd like to put the garden back. She was quiet for a moment. The soil's still good. I kept it turned. Of course you did. She leaned against the porch railing and looked out at the fields. I've been thinking, she said, about what comes next. I have my license. I've kept my continuing education current. If I started taking clients again, there's enough space here that I could use the East Wing as an office. While the tenant's lease runs out, I looked at her. The careful, watchful version of her. And underneath it, just underneath it, the way you can see a current moving under the surface of still water, the woman who used to walk through rooms like she owned them. The lease is up in October, I said. That's what I thought. You could set up before the end of the year. She looked at me sideways, something in her expression that was trying not to be too much. You'd be okay with that? She said. Me being here? I know it's your space. Caroline, I said. I spent 5 years in a facility in Frankfurt. This is not my space. This is our space. It always was. She looked away, nodded, quick and small, the way she did when she was trying not to cry. We stood there for a while. The sun moved. The light shifted across the walnut trees. Somewhere in the east pasture, the horses that Caroline had kept fed and cared for while I was gone moved through the tall grass. There is something I want to say, not for drama, not to make this more than it is, but because I think it is the most honest thing I can tell you about what 5 years of being gone taught me. I built this farm with my hands. I was proud of that. I thought the building of it was the point, the stone walls, the timber frames, the walnut trees I had planted from seedlings. I thought the value of what I had made was in the making of it, in the physical reality of it, in the fact that it existed and would continue to exist because I had put it there. But the farm was here when I was gone. The stone walls stood, the trees grew, The house did not collapse, and none of that was what I had lost, and none of that was what mattered when I came back through the gate. What mattered was that my daughter was there. What I had built that was worth something, the only thing I had ever built that was actually worth something, was a family that held together even when someone tried to take it apart. Even when my daughter thought I was dead and had nothing left and could have gone anywhere, she stayed in the home where she had grown up, and she kept it the way her mother had wanted it, and she turned the soil in the garden so it would be ready when it was needed. She didn't know she was waiting for me, but she was. I don't know what Raymond thought he was doing. I don't know if he told himself a story that made it make sense. Some narrative in which he was owed something, in which the years of being the lesser brother or the overlooked son or whatever wound he had been carrying finally entitled him to take. People do that. They build a case for themselves. They make themselves the protagonist of a story where what they're doing is justified. But I am not interested in Raymond's story. I haven't been for a long time. I am interested in the way the light comes across the east field in the morning, when the dew is still on the grass and the horses are moving slow. I am interested in the sound of the screen door at the back of the house, the way it has sounded since 1991, when I hung it myself. I am interested in the fact that my daughter is going to set up her landscape architecture practice in the East Wing in November, and that she has already made a list of the clients she plans to call. I am 67 years old. I lost 5 years. I will not pretend that those years were not lost, or that getting this place back undoes what Raymond did, or that returning to a house makes up for the time you could not spend in it. But I am here now. My daughter is here. The walnut trees are here, taller than I planted them, still standing along the east fence where I put them 40 years ago. That is, in the end, what I built. Not the walls, not the title, not the $8 million of property that a court gave back to me with the stroke of a pen. I built something that lasted even when I wasn't there to watch it, and I came home to find it still standing. That is enough. That is, after everything, more than enough.